So it seems to me that battles are a bit like buses. You wait ages and then two come along at once. Yes, today in Bane Wars, we're looking at two battles and we're going to start with the Orcs versus the humans. Hi, I'm Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining me today on Dragon's Teeth, where we are continuing our Bane Wars campaign. And we've got to a stage that, well, it's been brewing for a few moves. We've got to a stage where we've got two battles happening pretty much simultaneously. We've got one to the north that we're going to look at today. That's the Orcs versus the humans. And then further down to the south, we've got that ongoing conflict between the Fire Elves and the Dwarves. And this time, the Dwarves are under siege in their fortress. So let's have a look at the situation in the north first. So without going into huge amounts of detail, because obviously the game is still ongoing, but in a nutshell, what's happened is the Orcs have come down from the north, pretty much in a straight line down towards the centre of the Bane, exploring as they go, partly, but I'll get onto that. It so happens that the humans of the Bear tribe have come across from the northwest, and they're searching for a specific place. That's their major objective in the campaign at this stage. They've found this place. It happens to be almost directly on that Orc supply route. Now, the Orcs were the first to discover this area, rather mysterious area covered with standing stones and barrows and that sort of thing. But they decided not to really explore it. They came away from it and continued their journey south. So in a sense, that left the way open for the Bear tribe when they came across. They then found this site unoccupied and, of course, set up a camp there. As they've explored out from this, they've hit the villages and an old ruined fortress and a couple of other places that form part of the Orc supply route. Naturally enough, the humans took over these places, they've captured the supplies, and they've cut the Orc supply route. Now, this was not great for the Orcs because they're further down south, fighting the Dwarves, you may remember, from our Orcs Drift upload a little while back. Supply-wise, they're not too bad because they did capture a lot of supplies from those Dwarves. However, of course, from the Orc perspective, this is a problem that needs to be solved. So a large bulk of the Orc army has headed north. Now, the Orcs have also been in conversation with the Legions of the Dead, the vampire army. So there's a couple of undead units have joined in with the Orcs as well in order to help them. More about that later on, as we'll see. They've headed north to take on the humans. Now, the humans have got wind that this Orc army is heading their way. They've been very canny with their espionage and their scouting. They've actually got a force of rangers out working for them. So the Orc army has been picked up quite early on, which gives the humans lots of time to select a defensive position and get ready. So that's what they've done. They've anchored one flank to the river. They've built some defensive lines and they're waiting for the Orcs to advance. Now, what the Orcs don't know is that there is another section of that human army just across the other side of the river down to the south. And they, of course, are going to pop up at a most inopportune moment. So that's the setup for the battle. I think points-wise, it's fairly even, certainly with the Orcs and vampires combined. The human army is quite strong. They're well dug in. So it's going to be interesting to see what tactics the Orcs use. You may remember last time when they attacked that Dwarven outpost, they used that sort of that circling round and firing arrows in. That worked really well to soften up the defence, and then the trolls went in. So be interesting to see if those sort of tactics work again, or if the Orcs try something different. So here's our initial setup. We've got the Orcs and the undead to the left there. You can see the river across one edge of the table, and at the other end we've got the humans set up with some light defences, some palisades, that kind of thing. They've had time to prepare and dig in a little bit. let's take a closer look at their forces. This is the Brotherhood of the White Bear under the command of General Boris Ursus. And yeah, quite a strong force. Lots of mounted troops. They've got a unit of large bears at the back there. And some heavy cavalry on their left flank. And as I say, they're in well prepared and defended positions. Opposing them, we have the Red Wolves under Urglan Bane. So we've got some boar and wolf riders. We've got a couple of units of gargoyles. And we've got a big sort of core unit of trolls there as well, who are strong but quite slow moving. And just away to the right, we can see some companies of ghouls and heavy elite cavalry under the command of Baron Draugr of the Legion of the Dead. So the battle kicks off, and the first 2 turns really are the forces of the Orcs and the, say the Evil Dead, moving forward. Now, a problem I found with my forces here is the cavalry are pretty quick. They're moving 4. The ghouls, a bit like the trolls, they're strong but slow. They're only moving 2. So it's very easy for your cavalry to get ahead. Something else that did start happening here is the human shaman started to prepare a spell. I'll talk a little bit more about that as it happens later on. And yeah, the same thing for the Orcs here. The boar and the wolf riders are very nippy. They really do shift forward. And it does tend to mean your stronger troll units get a bit left behind. And I think this is where the Orc forces suffered a little bit later on. And there's that bridge I mentioned at the start. We need to keep an eye on that away down to the south there. Because, yeah, well, some things are going to be happening in that area. And I should just mention the commanders here. We've got Terry running the humans. We've got Mark controlling the Orcs. And I'm in charge of the vampires. There's also a special guest appearance from Steve a little bit later on, but we'll get to that. At the start of next turn, Terry starts rolling for his reinforcements. On the first roll, they need a 6. The next turn, a 5 or 6. Then a 4, 5 or 6, and so on. So they're definitely going to arrive at some point, but he can't pinpoint exactly when. The Orcs continue their advance. As you can see, the wolf riders and boar riders are getting closer now. You might notice the vampire cavalry there. As I said, they're pretty nippy, but they seem to be hanging back a little bit, almost as though they don't want to go charging into those defences. The gargoyles are following along behind. They're pretty quick, obviously, as flying troops you'd expect. Now, they didn't actually start with the Orc army, but they were recruited, and they have a bone or two to pick with the humans, who destroyed their hometown. So they're very highly motivated, at least at the moment. So there's the position at the end of that turn, and I think you can see the undead do seem to be lagging behind a bit. I think the Orc commander at this point started to get a bit suspicious. Start of the next turn, Terry rolled for his reinforcements, a 1, still no sign of them, and now we get our first volleys of fire. The wolf riders have poison arrows, but I have to say I think the Orcs were a little bit unlucky with their dice rolls. So just a few casualties on each side, nothing major. And from there we're getting into our next lot of movement. The Orc boar riders charge into the heavy cavalry. I suspect this is because they have the trait of war beasts, so on their first round they get to re-roll any misses. So on that first charge, with all the bonuses for the charge as well, they stand a pretty good chance of doing some damage. They're being supported by the gargoyles, and the wolf riders are still hovering around. I think there's some chariots moving up in support as well. So quite a strong force, but a very mobile force. However, they weren't really able to break those heavy cavalry. That's a very strong unit. And this is where we get the first nasty surprise for the Orcs, with the appearance of Steve's fire elves, or to be more precise, a unit of light cavalry and a dragon. Now these have been trailing the Orc force northwards, and they've taken this opportunity to attack the Orc camp. So they would actually be a little further back than this. And their target is the wagons that the Orcs plundered from the dwarves. So while the Orc units are fighting up the front there or advancing towards the humans, the sneaky fire elves have nipped in and are trying to make off with the plunder. Then we're into our melee, and the Orcs again a little bit unlucky with the dice roll. They didn't quite get the shock and awe of that initial charge that they hoped for. and the cavalry held. But having said that, casualties on both sides were pretty even, so for the moment that's a bit of a stalemate. And now we came really to the turning point, the pivotal point of the game, where Terry made a couple of very important dice rolls. First of all, he rolled and his reinforcements arrived. And secondly, he rolled for his shaman, who had spent a couple of turns preparing a summon spell, and he got a success with that. So a great bear turned up to assist the humans. And there's those reinforcements coming over the bridge. Not a huge force, but a fairly sizable one. And of course, they have appeared right at the rear of the Orc army. Speaking of which, the dragon starts wreaking havoc back at the Orc camp. This is going to affect not only the Orcs directly, but also this attracts the attention of the vampires as well, which is going to lead to another development. But back to the melee, and now it really starts going wrong for the Orcs. This round they take heavy losses against those cavalry. I think they missed their chance with that first attack due to some unlucky dice rolls. And this round they really start paying the price. Buoyed by their success, the human cavalry continue to charge forward into the next line of the Orcish forces, the gargoyles there included, so we have another melee in the offing. Now, this does leave a little bit of an opening in the line for the chariots to move up into. Having said that, that gap is pretty well covered by the advancing bears. Not just the unit of bears you see there, but also that great bear is floating around as well. So quite substantial Orc losses so far, and as you can see, a lot of the human army hasn't even been touched yet. It's still behind those defences. I think here Mark is saying, why aren't the undead advancing? Why are they hanging back? Especially the cavalry. Well, they've seen those reinforcements turn up, but of more interest to the vampires is that dragon. Now, I can't say too much about this because of stuff that's going on in the game still, but yeah, the appearance of the dragon is quite significant for the vampires, shall we say. In fact, so much so that Baron Draugr orders his forces to about turn and retreat away from the battlefield towards the dragon. So, that's pretty much it for the Orcs. Still a large part of the human army untouched. We've got those reinforcements turning up from the south, and of course there's that dragon merrily pillaging the base camp at the back there. And yeah, so at this point the Orcs concede defeat, and their remaining forces will try and make their escape as best they can. There we go then. Not a good day for the Orcs. Quite a large chunk of their army destroyed, particularly their wolf and boar riders. They still had some units left, so what we've got to resolve now is the post-battle situation. How many of those units escape? Are the humans going to hunt them down? Are they happy to let them go? How is that going to resolve itself? From the looks of it, the Orc leadership remains intact. So their general, and most importantly for the Orc morale, is their shaman, who's known as Mother. They also still have possession of the fabled Iron Crown, which you may remember was one of their objectives. So it is bad news for the Orcs, but they're not totally out of the game yet. They still have a section of their forces down southward, interestingly enough, very close by the vampire and the High Elf army. So we shall see how that, I don't know, shall we call it treachery or disappointment to the north, is going to affect relations down in the south as well. The human forces can be very pleased with themselves. They've seen off the Orcs. They've established their own supply line. They're rebuilding an old fortress on that supply line. So they've got a secure border or barrier, if you like, around that area that they were looking for, their sacred burial grounds. And as we're coming up to the end of this first phase now, the expeditionary phase, it's pretty much clear that the humans have reached all their objectives. So I guess their aim now is probably to establish and strengthen that defensive line and get ready for the next phase. Will the Orcs want their revenge? That's it for the first report then. Thanks for watching. As always, please do keep your comments, questions and suggestions coming in. And a shout out again to the fantastic Battles rule set that we're using across this campaign. Really enjoying using those. They're working really well. Stay tuned for the Fire Elf attack on the Dwarven Stronghold, because that'll be coming up soon. I'll see you then.